Meg and I will be leading you through this presentation today. And just to give you an overview of what we'll talk about CTI as an overview and concept, its inception. We'll begin to talk about program design, some elements of eligibility, staffing needs, best practices to help you submit and plan for your next application. We'll talk about whether or not you want to submit a new application or submit a modification as well. I'm sure you may be wondering which is the best course for me. And we want to talk about the nature of these grants. We consider them grants as partnerships, and that's really presented in the way we request and charge our grantees with getting MOAs with the Mass Hire Center and employers. We'll talk about proposing your budget, and the format of budget is cost reimbursement for CTI. We'll talk about some performance and outcomes, and finally, some characteristics of a strong application. There's other resources that we're including in this presentation, and we suspect that this will all be useful to help you submit a really competitive application feasible for your school and your region, to help further our commitment to the construction and skills trades and manufacturing. Okay, wonderful. So just as you may know, CommCorp, we serve as an intermediary for ELWD to administer state funds to build the capacity of grantees and increase scale for workforce development pipelines. We do this in 3 ways. We do this in investing in future workforce, development of an immediate pipeline of workers, and train and upskill current workforce. Where CTI fits in is in that middle section that says develop an immediate pipeline for workers. And the way that we do this is by providing funding for training that leads to an industry recognized credential and is linked to job placement at the end of the training. And so this is a big component of some of the funding programs that we offer here at CommCorp, and we're so excited that you are part of this pipeline of workers to help further bridge the connection between labor and industry. Next slide, please. So let's talk about CTI. In case you are not formally aware, the Workforce Skills Cabinet and Commonwealth Corporation launched CTI under the direction of Governor Charlie Baker to supply vocational technical high schools with the funding to expand after dark training capacity that will upskill new workers and address our employer needs. So these trainings that are funded with CTI are all after dark, after your general high school hours that you would expect. The program pairs employers with local voc tech schools that are training new workers with the skills necessary to fill these in-demand occupation. Now, the goal of these partnerships is to create a sustainable talent development pipeline. We really want these folks who are engaging in these programs to move right into high demand jobs that pay well and offer life-sustaining wages. So as part of these partnerships, employers will become encouraged to provide feedback on curriculum and screening methodologies. We want employers to be involved. So these are, again, real-time, sort of relevant skills that are being trained. In addition to program funding, partnerships will receive technical assistance and recruiting support from Mass Hire Centers and Regional Workforce Board. And of course, CommCorp will be here along the way. So in our next slide, that's a bit about CTI. In our next slide, we're going to dig a little more deeper into the in-demand occupations. Meg?
Fantastic. So CTI is specific in that we are looking to expand pipelines and training courses in 20 in-demand occupations that fall into the construction and trades industry and the manufacturing industry. So you can see this list of 20 target occupations for a CTI program. Occupation, and then their corresponding Chapter 74 program that's running out of your vocational school that we're turning into the Career Technical Institute. A strong application, something that we're looking for, is a CTI school that is working with their local employers and their mass hire and workforce development ecosystem in their area to offer trainings in something in these occupations that fit a need, a critical need specific to their community. So your region needs welders, they need plumbers. That's what you're taking back, because your employers are speaking back to you and you're in conversation with the other workforce development entities to fill this need in the regional plan.
Wonderful. So I want to talk a little bit about funding. CTI was conceptualized in January 2020 The funding, the seed money that was first introduced was appropriated in the FY21 state budget. It started with just $4 million. And over time, the Baker administration only increased its commitment to CTI. So in addition to the state funding, in case you're not completely familiar, even if all the dollars that was appropriated in a state budget at a particular time are not spent or not obligated, that funding doesn't die or disappear. It is placed into a trust, specifically the Workforce Competitiveness Trust Fund, which we can use over time to continue to invest and fund our Chapter 74 vocational high schools. And so in FY21 budget, we received $4 million. FY22, that amount more than doubled. And it was just over about 15.3 million. And just recently we were approved, we received increased funding for CTI with about 20.4 million. And this is just FY23 state funds. We are at a unique opportunity where the Baker-Polito administration was able to appropriate a large number of ARPA funds, which is a part of the American Rescue Plan Act. The funding was available to help recover and recharge the economy from the effects of COVID. And from those dollars, we have an additional 25 million dedicated to CTI. So for this round of funding that you will hear more about, that will be announced on the 25th, just between FY23 and the ARPA funds, we're about 45.4 million to invest in our CTI schools. So there's plenty of money out there, and we're looking forward to see how we can invest in your particular schools and grow the capacity and reach of these very, very important in-demand skilled trades in manufacturing. Meg is going to talk a little bit about the work that we've done so far in expanding this program.
Great. So to date, CTI has released six and a half rounds of funding since the announcement in January 2020, which means that to date we have 25 schools across Massachusetts that have been awarded funding to run CTI training programs. And a subset, about 10 or 12 of those 25 schools have been awarded multiple grants across many rounds. So they have a lot of experience that they bring to the table. Those CTI schools are currently active in 6 out of the 7 workforce regions in Massachusetts and have been allocated nearly $17 million since its inception for training across all rounds. You can see from this map that I'm very excited about, white pins are older schools who were around in the first 1 through 4 rounds of funding in 2021. Red pins came on board in about the past 6 months. So we started out very Northeast region heavy, and have spread out across the Southeast and Central Mass and Pioneer Valley as well. So if you're in the Berkshires today, call us. We are looking to collect a full set. So that is kind of a snapshot of where we are sitting at the beginning of round 7.
Great, thank you, Meg. All right, so let's talk about program design. How do you design a program that is not just competitive, but is able to be implemented and feasible, that you can carry out confidently? So we're proposing that schools must consider 5 key pathway-related CTI requirements in your program design. The first is proposed programs must currently be designated as a DESE Chapter 74 vocational program aligned to the occupation for the adult training program. So those are the only folks who are eligible for this funding are the VOTEC high schools that are Chapter 74 designated. And if you already have that designation, you are free to apply for this funding. Now, to provide training programs, we require a minimum of 1 occupation or program pathway. So if you have a VOTEC trades or a program that is just welding or just culinary or just manufacturing, like CNC operator, just the one is sufficient to apply for funding and receive support to build that program out. We asked all our grantees, or at least our applicants, to provide at least 1 cohort of, and not more than 6 cohorts per occupational program. We have a minimum of 10 students per cohort. We have not reached a level where one school is offering more than 6 cohorts, but schools do apply for multiple cohorts over the course of the grant term, which is typically 2 years. So if you have 3 or 2 or 4 program pathways that you're confident you can run with this funding, please apply for this opportunity. Now, the overall total instructional hours should be a minimum of 200, a maximum of 300. And so that's sort of the standard of how long these programs should run, and that should help inform how you build out your curriculum and your training, get your instructor needs, and so forth. And finally, we require that you consider offer training that results in the industry recognized credentials that's required for entry into the target occupations. As Meg detailed in that earlier slide that talks about the 20 in-demand occupations, those are the ones that allow you to be eligible for this funding. So anything outside of the construction skills trades that aren't listed or manufacturing, CTI does not fund, but there may be other opportunities in other programs that may fund another training pathway outside of the ones we've listed. Next slide, please. Okay, so a big part of program design is program eligibility. Who are you doing this for? Who is your audience? And what things should you consider to ensure that you are attracting and recruiting this audience? Now, across the board, for all of our pipeline credentialing programs, we have wide application to ensure that these are offered to unemployed and underemployed individuals. And probably the major point of rigidity is that they're Massachusetts residents only. That's who this funding is for. And throughout the entire Commonwealth, if the person is unemployed and underemployed, fundamentally they are eligible. Now, there are other components about your program design that you may need to consider that will impact who is eligible in your program. And that typically has to do with who your employer partners are and what school you're in, if there's additional requirements that allow someone able to be admitted into that particular school. So fundamentally, these funding opportunities do not put any major restrictions on who is able to participate outside of them being unemployed or underemployed. However, if your school requires someone to have a certain level of high school equivalency, or perhaps need to go through CASAS or TABE testing in order to enter, those are things that you would need to consider as you recruit and ask people to enter into your program. Now, I want to talk about defining unemployed and underemployment because it's had many iterations and phases over the course of the years that CTI has been operational. And that has been trying to just get it right. We want to ensure that we're being as accommodating as possible and get as many people in the door, at least from a funder's perspective, as possible. So historically, defining underemployment has been inconsistent. It's quite easy to be unemployed and well, not easy to be unemployed, but easy to verify whether or not you're unemployed. But underemployed, again, has taken a few different versions. So it's been inconsistent. This new RFP will announce a change to defining underemployment that is straightforward and practical to verify and document. I can't outright say it just yet because up until the minute, there might be some room for last minute changes, but the goal is that we are going to move away from self-sustaining wage as a means to define unemployment or someone who's making less than a self-sustaining wage, because it's been seen as vague or abstract, sort of difficult to define without some clear guardrails. Some of the issues that we've also presented is that CommCorp has historically asked our schools to tell us how you want to define it, just be consistent. And in many cases, that can become an administrative burden. It may not be consistent. So we want to move away from language that makes it difficult for you to allow people to get in the door and just move on with training in your programs. So we've updated the definition that will be prescriptive in nature, less of administrative burden, and something that you can easily reference with options to verify and document that again are straightforward and allow you to move on to training and get as many people in the door as possible. But we do want to emphasize that the funding source itself does not impose anything beyond unemployed and underemployed individuals. However, you may want to consider your partnerships with your employers or even your schools if there are additional factors that may limit who can come into your program and just have that accounted for in your application. Next slide, please.
So I've set up this list of 10 kind of guiding questions. Say that you're a new school, you've never been awarded CTI funding before, and you're like, am I ready? How do I know if I'm ready to have an implementation grant with CTI? These 10 guiding questions are meant to be kind of a guidepost for you to evaluate. So look at your programs, look at your schools, and ask yourself, if you are answering these first 5 questions, yes, then you are ready to go. So you have experience, at least marketing or providing, training, community engagement programs. You have that experience. You have developed training programs that leave people with a credential so that they are able to walk out of the training and right into the workforce and get placed in a job. You have instructors. You have instructors on staff, and I'm sure all of our experienced CTI grantees in this room would tell you that instructors are very key. So if you don't have them on staff, then number 4, do you have experience hiring people outside of your faculty? Do you have connections, people who are still in the industry, people who are retired from the industry who can come in and teach these programs? Because that's going to be key. You're not going to be able to run your training programs without somebody to teach them. And finally, do you have any experience working with a Mass Hire Career Center in the region, since they're going to be key partners in the recruitment and the placement and the support services aspect of this? And we'll talk a little bit more about the role of Mass Hire and partners in the coming slides, but you have a good touch point with them, then you're in a good place. So if you're answering yes to these 5, please apply. We'd love to see it. If you're looking down the list and you're looking at 6 through 10, and maybe you have some of them, but not all of them, 6 through 10 is going to make a stronger application, but you can work on it. So if you have experience with the target population, people who are unemployed or underemployed, as we just went over, if you have experience working with people who have language or learning barriers, acting as a little bit more support, we want to urge supportive services, wraparound services for participants. If you have the staff capacity, there's a fair amount of administrative work, there's program management element to this. So you want to make sure that you have people on your staff who have the time and capacity to be available for the needs of the grant. Do you have that? Do you have experience managing grants at all? The submitting invoices, reporting, managing data. That's gonna be helpful, and it's gonna build up a stronger application. So if you're looking at this list and you're seeing 1 through 5 and you have that, you're so ready. That's amazing. Please apply for round 7. If you are looking down the list and you have something and you want to talk it through, that is what the office hours are for. That's what the rest of our team is for. So please reach out. We'll have contact information available in approximately 700 different places for you to reach out. But I would say that these guiding questions are really helpful in kind of determining whether you are ready as a school to take on a CTI grant.
Great, thank you, Meg. Okay, so what are some characteristics of a strong application? So in addition to those questions that we asked our potential grantees to pose to yourselves and to your team, there's also some things that we look for while we're reviewing applications that we want to set you up for success by just setting the tone here. We want to ensure that your proposal, your application, directly responds to the RFP, that what you're presenting is well aligned to the grant initiatives and goals. And honestly, that's not very difficult for our Chapter 74 schools to do. If you're a Chapter 74 Voc Tech school and you're applying for CTI with one of the 20 occupations, you are well aligned to the grant initiatives. We want to also see expertise or history of success that it's clearly demonstrated. So we'll talk more about the details of the review process at the bidders webinar, which is slated for the 27th. But we may, CommCorp reserves the right to assess your past performance. If you're a returning school and we don't have outcomes, or if there are challenges with performance, then that might come into consideration in whether you would return for additional funding. But generally, if you have expertise in a particular training pathway, it's well demonstrated and there's history of your success, feel free that it just presents a strong application. We also suggest a strong organizational structure. It may seem sort of vague, but what Meg mentioned about having instructors, having a full-time staff person, or even a part-time staff person to focus solely on CTI is evidence of someone where we know that there's administrative capacity to run the program. And of course, if you apply for this funding, you can put in funds to have a full-time staff person on board to do this work. Funding will pay for that. So again, please know that if you don't have it yet, funding can allow you to have that. Don't let that deter you from applying. We want to see evidence of strong employer and regional partnerships. We're going to talk more about those employer and regional partnerships in a couple slides, but this is quite important, especially when it comes to recruitment, managing expectations, and how you work with your Mass Higher Career Center in particular. Well, we want your budgets to be reasonable, but again, that's not something that you can stray too far of. We'll talk about the budget, and we generally give a figure, and with CTI, folks just work backwards from that. You may or may not be aware, but in round 6, we pushed the max. We gave every grantee the max amount of $6,000 per participant because the funding was available, and we just gave that whether or not you requested for it. So it's really hard to go astray from presenting a reasonable budget. We want to see clear implementation plan to achieve your outcomes. We'll talk about performance later in the presentation. And we also would like you to account for any barriers and have contingency plans where you anticipate there might be concerns in areas of recruitment, of administrative capacity, whatever a barrier you might anticipate could come along in implementing a program. If you have a plan to address it, it's just a characteristic of a strong application. I provided here 2 samples of someone accounting for a recruitment process. And so sample 2 talks about things that oftentimes we might see in an application that becomes problematic later, as evidenced in a not quite detailed recruitment plan. And then we later see as a program is being implemented that they struggle with recruitment. And so we can kind of see the proof in the pudding in how detailed things are in their application. And so sample 2 says there's little to no detail connecting participants to employers to meet a specific need. Recruitment sources may appear indirect. It works on assumptions, not exactly on specific roles and people that are going to support. And here's there's a quote here that the program coordinator will utilize a mass hire to recruit participants. It's just a few lines. And we've seen in other programs where recruitment detailing was weak, they practically struggle in that area. Secondly, we have sample 1, which is something that is a lot more detailed. It talks about accounting for a recruitment process that ensures participants are willing and able to work in a target occupation. A specified recruitment source, there's process and identified staff with oversight. The work is contextualized and prepares the participants for success, and the employers are engaged even beyond their MOA. And so it's good to ensure that you go through some of those details, not just for the sake of writing an RFP, but that it matters when it comes to implementation. Another note that I would add is to be careful to repurpose an old proposal for a new RFP. We can tell. So if you're working on an application and you just sort of want to blow the dust off and resubmit it, where it's applicable, that's fine, but it's important to sort of be thorough in your review and your submission of that RFP, because we can tell if it's been repurposed for this round, and there may be implications on how you actually implement it successfully. So these are just some details to pay attention to. Next slide, please.
Yeah, so, I know a lot of you listening to this are current grantees. You have an active CTI grant right now, and you might be wondering, do I really need to go through the round 7 application if I just want to add to my grant right now? There is an option to modify contracts, to add more cohorts, add more to your budget. We definitely have the resources and the desire to be scaling up programs that are successful and we know are working. So I've concocted this extremely helpful flowchart to start the conversation about whether you should be applying for round 7 or whether you should be talking to your program manager for a modification. So question is, are the pathways that you're looking to run currently awarded as a part of your active CTI grant? Do you have around 6 to run welding and carpentry? And are you looking to just add a carpentry cohort in the summer of 2023? Everything went really well. If that's all you're doing, then please reach out to your program manager about a modification. You've already gotten that program approved through the round 6 application. It's just about coming up with a new budget, submitting more modification materials, and going through that process. If everything went really well, but you are looking to expand, you ran a welding and a carpentry, and now you want to run electrical and HVAC. You have those Chapter 70 programs already in-house. You're looking to expand that. Those new pathways are a new application. You want to get them through that. Make sure that you have employers lined up, that you're working with your mass hire on those, on recruiting for those kinds of programs. So that's your decision tree based on that. I will say as a caveat for either applying for round 7 or a modification, that CommCorp is asking that we take current performance as an indicator of whether we're moving forward with either of these, right? So if you're struggling with recruitment on your current programs, then we might want to wait before we start adding more cohorts and more money. It's that's a conversation to move forward. Also, for my notes, I will ask, we'll have time to talk through questions. If you are a current grantee and you have a specific question about your specific programs, about a modification, if you could just connect with me separately and email, and we'll set up a time to talk rather than going through here about whether your specific programs require modification. I'm happy to talk about that off of this meeting, just as a general warning as well. But if you're looking at what you have right now and you want to scale up, this is your thought process to what conversation you want to start, round 7 or a modification. Okay. All right, Tony, back to you.
All right, great. So really quickly, I just want to go over the profile of a lead applicant. Again, we mentioned that eligible applicants are Massachusetts high schools with designated Chapter 74 vocational programs. Again, both new and existing schools are invited to apply. We encourage it. But just want to talk about the profile of an applicant that'll just allow you to be successful moving forward. These are all things that you will see in the RFP, but we just want to reiterate it, especially as we end up talking about grants as partnerships and some of the commitments that lead applicants will need to enter into to administer a grant of this size and scope. So we'd like you to have a commitment to work collaboratively, ensure that the program meets participant needs, your employer needs, and that you achieve your planned outcomes. We want there to be an ability to convene the partners or access opportunities to convene with partners to help support your program and its success. We will require that you collect and report all required data. So there's some administrative record keeping and data management that's required as part of being a lead applicant. We want you to be in good standing in Massachusetts and demonstrate the capability and capacity to provide training, including meeting any state or federal regulatory requirements. So there's like OSHA standards, things like that you could ensure that you're able to carry out and provide as an industry recognized credential. Again, have interest and the capacity to engage in open communication. CommCorp really relies on the feedback of our grantees. We want to hear how things are going. We want to know what's going well and what's not going well, because that allows us to make changes to the RFPs and ensure that the way that funding is utilized and offered are meeting the real needs of you all as the people doing the work. So we really look forward to continued engagement and communication. Again, CTI staff, we're available to support you. So Mega's going to take the next slide talking about grants as partnerships.
Great, fantastic. So there are a few partnerships that we absolutely require as a part of a CTI application. That's going to be a partnership with 3 employers that account for all of the program pathways that you are submitting. So if you are running, again, I list the welding and carpentry programs. If you have 3 employers that are planning to hire welders and you submit those as your 3 letters, then I'm going to wonder what the carpentry students are going to do when I read your application. So make sure that you're getting employers that cover all of your program pathways. So these businesses should sign a memorandum of agreement or a letter of support. What we're looking for, and there's more details about this in the RFP, what we're looking for is employers that are not only agreeing to interview and potentially hire the graduates of your program, but we also want to see them involved in the curriculum. Are you taking in business needs into account in when you're building out what people are learning? If there's a credential that employers absolutely require for their employees, are you getting that credential as a part of your program? Seeing that kind of employer engagement is going to make a really strong application that they're committing to, sitting in a convening, meeting with you regularly to talk about employer needs. That's going to make a strong application. I will say for returning schools who have just been through this process with getting employer letters and are applying for a lot of grants in the workforce development sphere that require employer letters, we'll have some more details about this. If you have a specific question, again, feel free to reach out. If you have a letter from a previous grant application and you're going to be working with the same employer again, we will accept some email communication that between yourself and the employer that just says, please apply this letter to the round 7 application as well. Something that covers it so that we see an older date on there, but we know that it's still relevant, that the business need is still there, just to cut down a little bit of that administrative burden of making people write out a letter or sign, getting that on the letterhead, while still making sure that we know that the need is still present and that the employers are still engaged. So that's employer requirements. Also required is at least an MOA with at least one mass hire career center in your area. And the next couple of slides will detail the requirements, what the responsibilities are of those career centers. But what we're looking for in general, they're there to assist the school in the recruitment, support services, and placement of participants. Again, more details. If you're looking for a best practice, getting them involved early and getting them involved regularly, working with your career center partner is going to make for a stronger program because they're involved. Career center, so great at following up with participants, more position for recruitment and getting people placed in employment and offering support services. If they're involved at the very beginning of your program, then it helps with the follow through when you're trying to collect all of this information from people at the end. So that's my tip of seeing the best practices of Career Center. Finally, what is recommended but is not required is some kind of MOA with your local mass hire workforce board. What we want to see is evidence that you're collaborating with the workforce entities in your area to kind of best serve your participants and fill the acute need based on the regional planning blueprints. Workforce boards are positioned with employers to kind of see what the landscape looks like that you're filling the need in your area. So we have resources and FTEs in the mass hire system who are prepared to support the training programs in funneling participants and connecting you with employers. But we have resources. We'll talk a little bit later in the slide as well. Those are the required partnerships and recommended partnerships that we're looking for in a round 7 application.
Great, thanks, Meg. I'm going to run through this really quickly just because some of it you may already know. The only thing I would want to hire is that requirements of lead applicants, which will be the school, that you will be fundamentally and on paper required to recruit, assess, screen participants. You may receive help with some of these partners that we're going to talk a little bit more in the next slide, but all reporting requirements, participant data, record keeping and documentation, these are all things that the lead applicant must do. So Meg, you want to move on to the next slide?
I would love to.
I really want to talk about the responsibilities, the shared responsibility, and how the partnership with Mass Hire Career Center is going to look like, because we understand that this has varied and looked a little uneven from region to region, from county to county, depending on how you get engaged with your Mass Hire Career Center. I will say that the MOA that we require, beyond it being an agreement, that the Mass Hire Career Centers enter into, it's important for both the school and the Mass Hire to understand what the shared responsibility is, how they can work together, and some of the differences that are not required for CTI programming that might be required within the Mass Hires because they operate WIOA Title I programming. So oftentimes, recruitment could be sourced from the school, maybe networks with labor unions or what have you, where they know that there's a cohort of people that might be interested in a welding program. And then you invite them to use the Mass Hire to funnel into as a point of access to get to your program. Now, you can use recruitment through a number of ways, whether you work with a local community organization or you work with, whatever would support your recruitment if you know there's interest. But we want the Career Center to be on paper supporting this. And it's important to understand that among the Mass Hire Career Centers, they're required to engage people who walk in the door that may be potentially WIOA Title I adult or dislocated workers. Those requirements to become registered as a WIOA Title I adult or dislocated worker is not required to participate in CTI. However, the Career Center may have people go through a workshop or may just get their PID set up in the system with JobQuest so that they can be within the system and account for their engagement. Perhaps if they go through a training program and need to be reintroduced back into the Mass Hire for whatever reason. So it's important to understand the distinct requirements of WIOA Title I, and it's even important for the Mass Hires to know that because WIOA Title I has income requirements. You have to be low income in order to be a dislocated worker. So if you pass that threshold, you may not be eligible for WIOA services, but you could be eligible for CTI. So it's important to know these differences, but it might be a bit of a balancing act to ensure that people aren't sort of lost in the system or met with any administrative hurdles before actually getting to the school. So if you don't already know, your particular region or Mass Hire Career Center may have an upskilling navigator, but you can also work with the career counselors in that center to help support sort of pulling people through and triaging them to CTI in a way that's more streamlined, that doesn't require the whole gamut of being WIOA registered. Because again, you do not need to be WIOA eligible to access CTI funding. There's still some myths out there, but I wanted to emphasize that. Secondly, you have a market maker. Your market maker, there's one per region. Some of them are even represented on this call, but we'll have a slide later in the deck that showcases who your market makers are. Your market makers are out in the communities, mostly employer facing. They might work with schools, but we want to ensure that the market makers and the upskilling navigators are talking to each other, that we understand how to support recruitment into our CTI programming or whatever state funding programming that is, and that there isn't any overburdening of that process so you don't lose anyone in the mix. So those MOAs are important, but they should also reflect strong partnership with the centers, that you understand the nuances of what it means to run a center, but also how recruitment can probably be supported and not burdened by working with your career center. So again, I wanted to highlight the upskilling navigators. Although there's funding for one per career center, we currently are still hiring, and right now we're at about 11. But the functionality of upskilling navigator, which essentially is supporting people who come in and out of the centers on making well-aligned decisions for their next training or upskilling opportunity, that function should still be present in your Mass Hire Career Center. So I wanted to emphasize that this is a shared responsibility. The Career Center can help screen and see who can be eligible, but the ultimate person who documents recruitment and documentation needs or anything will be the school. So you'll hear more about this in the RFP, in the bidders webinar, but I did want to highlight this relationship is really important, but especially to ensure you manage expectations and know how to work well together. Next slide, please.
Hey, I'm just going to take a little bit of time to touch on the program budget that you'll see when you finally get the RFP materials next week. This is what the summary budget form will look like. So this will populate what the details that you're listing. You'll notice that there are like two budgets on this page. There's an implementation budget, which is the cost that it takes to run your program. So that is going to be the staff time it takes to, for the instructors, for the administrators, any of the program costs, like the training materials, any marketing, any travel, things like that. Support services, any contractors that you're working with, stipends or transportation, gas cards. We're bringing in curriculum experts. That's your implementation budget. That's for the run of the program. The implementation budget is determined based on the programs that you're suggesting. In that, you'll get $6,000 per student per proposed enrollment. So if you are proposing 2 cohorts of 10 students, that's 20 students times 6,000 is $120,000. I'm like 90% sure. So that's going to be your maximum amount, and you'll see this overall cost per participant served, like enrollment, this cost analysis line in the screenshot of the budget. If you see that go over 6,000, then you need to reduce your budget and bring it back down. So that'll keep track of your cost per participant. There's also a startup budget that you have access to. It's a one-time up to $40,000 award. So if you have already received a startup award, you are not eligible for another one. So this is new schools, be relevant to you. It's for startup activities associated with the grant. Let's say you need to do some marketing, you need to do a lot of outreach, you're printing flyers, you're getting a consultant, you need to work on some curriculum. So you bring in curriculum consultant, you're doing some staff time, any of those kind of costs that are associated with getting the program on its feet. So that's some additional award for that. So if you are a new school applying for the first time, you've never gotten a startup budget before, you've never gotten an implementation budget, your total award amount is going to be at $6,000 times the amount of people you're proposing to serve, plus up to $40,000. If you have already received your startup award in a previous round, then you are just the implementation budget, just $6,000 times the amount of students. So as Katani kind of mentioned a while ago, I would call the best process to decide how many people you're trying to serve and then work backwards from $6,000 times that number. So we want to run 2 cohorts of 10. Our budget is $120,000 and work backwards moving forward. Then, let's see, so we'll have the budget narrative. You'll be asked to include some details about where you're spending the money on, what kinds of things you're buying and using this funds for. In terms of allowable costs, there's more detail on this in the RFP, so I'm not going to go through every allowable cost because most of them are allowable costs, if not pretty much all of them are going to be allowable costs. Kind of an overview, we do allow for indirect costs capped at 10% of your budget. So you might have some costs that are essential to the run of your program that someone's calling me. Okay. Essential to the run of your program, but are not necessarily easy to be determined as for CTI round 7, like utilities for your building. It's not just you're not just having gas or heat for round 7 CTI programs. So you're welcome to use a portion of your budget on indirect costs like that. Marketing, outreach, anything associated with training, delivery. So the program materials, you need metal that people can learn to weld on or things like that. Any staff time for the coordination, the partnership, any of the data entry, including if you need administrative support or you need to establish a new position to run your night school or career technical education. Any costs of the licenses or credentials, what to bring in a HotWorks trainer or the cost of an OSHA class. That's absolutely fair game. Support services, as a best practice note, I love to see support services in your budget. That $6,000 per participant, is, meant to make sure that people are able to get into your program and there's no barriers. So whether it's a training stipend or buying tools or uniforms or transportation, gas cards, childcare vouchers, pretty much anything is going to be fair game to make sure that there's as low barriers as possible to get people in this program and are able to participate. And there's no match requirement. So this is all coming from us. Great. Okay. I'm going to keep talking about performance benchmarks and outcomes. We've kind of hinted at them, and if you're a current grantee, then you've heard me talk about these ad nauseum, so I apologize. There's kind of 3 performance benchmarks during the course of the CTI grant. Comes at the beginning with enrollment, that a participant has been there for 2 weeks. They're sticking around, essentially. At enrollment, it comes when they complete and they attain their credential, and then once they are placed in a job and retained for 30 days. So those are our performance benchmarks that we're looking at. This chart would appear in a contract, should you be awarded one for round 7. And it just kind of gives a sense of the expectations of your program and what we're looking for and what we're counting as a successful program. Because it might be easier than you think. It might be stricter than you think, depending on that. So throughout the benchmark, if you are, meeting between 70 and 80% of the projected numbers that you had, or out of the total of the previous, then that's great. So you are looking to enroll 100 participants across all of your cohorts, and you actually end up enrolling 75. Then that's great. That's meeting our performance benchmark. And then out of those 75, if 60 of them actually make it through to the end of the program and get their credential, that is, meeting the threshold benchmark. I think that's 75% based on my math, and so on. So I will say that, underperforming, if you are in the middle of your grant and you're not hitting this, you're under 70%, that's not an immediate cue to cut off funding immediately, barred from ever applying to CTI again. It's just an indicator for us as your program managers to check in, see what we can do to help you with the recruitment. If you're having trouble recruiting, if you're having trouble retaining people, if you are having trouble tracking down the placements, what's happening there. And then if you're a current grantee, we're looking at this chart and kind of taking that into account when we're looking at our future funding decisions to see, how do they do on these benchmarks, and taking that, using that as a holistic approach to what we know of you as what it looks like as a grantee. So you'll see these in the contract and working towards them. So when you're thinking about how many people should I be planning to serve in my programs, think about the 70 to 80% number as like meeting the benchmark, the threshold, just as a hot tip for planning your programs.
All right. So we talked a lot about program design elements, things related to eligibility, what you need to do as a lead applicant, really emphasized the requirements on having MOAs and written agreements with 3 employers and your Mass Hire Career Center. We also wanted to make note of the support that you have regionally. If you haven't already been aware, you have a market maker that is really heavily supported by Kristen Rain, who's our upskilling and workforce system director here at CommCorp. But each region has a market maker that's intended to support even the convening needs that you might have, where you can be introduced to employers or opportunities as a high school to help meet the needs of an employer in your region that's looking to get some talent and invest in workforce development. So we have their lovely photos and their names and the areas identified on this slide. Again, these are the 7 super regions throughout the Commonwealth. So if you don't already know your market maker, please be connected. They would also help you get connected with your area career centers, your upskilling navigator, if there's one already in place, and really help coordinate those MOA agreements. They're just good people to know, and they're completely invested in helping you not just submit for this funding, but have successful programming. Next slide, please. Okay, so we are reaching the end of this portion of the presentation. We're going to spend a lot of time answering your questions, but I want to let you know that there's many opportunities, at least a handful, to engage with this process for procurement. So today we did pre-application assistance. We just want you to think about the elements that are necessary to have not just a competitive application, but a successful program. And then once the RFP opens on the 25th, there will be a bidders webinar, which will be a lot more specific to the RFP and the components of the RFP and submitting an application on time. So some of the questions that you might have today won't be addressed in that presentation, but we did send out the agenda so you know what to expect for those respective convenings. Again, we will host 2 office hours on November 1st and November 3rd. They're listed there. And if you want to register for some or all of the events that are among the procurement activities, this link here to Eventbrite will get you there. So you can register, which is just for your convenience. You don't need a ticket or anything. Those links will come right to the Zoom meetings. Feel free to just join ahead. And again, if you are new school and you're still thinking about, is this the right time for us to plan for CTI and apply, there is an in-person planning session that Bob LePage and Lou Lopes will run and facilitate at Assabet. So we really encourage you engaging with these opportunities to learn more, ask your questions, not to mention as part of the procurement process, which is policy, we will have any questions that you submit documented and posted on the webpage with respect to CTI. So all of our funding opportunities at CommCorp are available at commcorp.org/funding. You won't see CTI just yet. It will post on October 25th. We have a link for blueprint regions. I saw a question about the blueprint regions. I know there's still updating that needs to happen. So we encourage you to engage with them so long as they're relevant, but you can also work with your local workforce boards to account for specific needs in particular industries that may not be reflected as current in the blueprints. I know there's some regional planning grants and some work to update them that are happening now, but we do list this as a point of reference. We also list your Mass Hyatt Career Centers and your workforce boards. Please engage with these folks. They're your local experts. They're your local supports just to help you run some effective programming. Next slide, please.
Right, so when you are,
sorry.
So looking at the notes. All right. So when we say that you can find this RFP on Tuesday, this is the steps that you're going to take to find the RFP. CommCorp, the available funding page, and then you'll find it listed. We have a current list of our open funding opportunities if you'd like to peruse ahead of time. On Tuesday, you'll find round 7 among that list, and you'll have more details there. So it will go live Tuesday morning, October 25th, and will stay open through November 21st at 11:59 p.m. It will close. So on the available funding page, we will have the document of the RFP itself for your reading pleasure. The application materials, including the program and budget form where you're going to be filling out all of this information. And we also will have a fun link to not only submit questions to be answered through our official Q&A, but as well as sign up to be notified when that Q&A answer document is posted. And it will be posted on the available funding page under the RFP with all of this information. So if you have official questions that you'd like to go through that process, you're looking at it, the questions will be open for submitting it through November 3rd, and any questions that are collected through November 3rd will be posted on November 7th. Obviously, the link will stay open, and if we get additional questions after that November 3rd deadline, we'll be posting additional Q&A answers as needed, and you'll get notified if you sign up through that link. We also, we have contact information throughout the RFP, as well as on the website and in this presentation itself to reach out if you need additional support, as well as all of these other procurement activities that are happening ahead of time. So there's going to be a lot of stuff on the available funding page, including the recording of this session as well. So look out for that.
All right. We will move ahead to the question and answer portion of this presentation. Like, if you don't mind, you can stop sharing your screen so we can engage with our audience and begin answering some questions that were posed throughout. So again, thank you for sending your questions. Feel free to chat them, and then if you want to raise your hand too at a later time, we can. But I'll start with one question that came up a couple times, and that is on timeline. And I can clearly say that some timelines that you need to be aware of beyond the procurement timeline is we anticipate that the contract start dates, if you are awarded, will begin March 1st, 2023. It can beginning March 1st, and the contract end date for this round 7 will end February 28th, 2025. Again, if you already are familiar, for administrative ease, we end all the contracts at the same time for CTI per round. If you were involved in round 6, they all end in October 2024. So for this round, they will end February 2025. We are hoping training cohorts start beginning March 2023. Now, applicants will be notified of awards, and this is anticipated between January and February 2023. So there's about a month lead time. We want to push for that January date so you have the time to, if you're doing startup funds, get what you need in place, get your recruitment in order, get your instructors and so forth. There's going to be the holiday lull. So of course, once your applications come in, that's just before Thanksgiving. We will do the review period. So January is what we're pushing for, to have announcements on who will be awarded. As you know, when we make awards, the governor's office is really close to this, and they want to be able to do press announcements and so forth. So usually some of our back and forth or some time considers what the governor's office has to do as well. So again, RFPs open October 25th. You'll have about 4-5 weeks to submit them. I think it's 4 weeks, as they are due November 21st. The first deadline to submit written questions is November 3rd. We will post answers to questions on November 7th, but you can continue to send questions in. We'll update them like on a weekly or so basis, and then your proposals will be due November 21st. Again, anticipated notification for awards is January 2023, and we're looking to fund cohorts that begin their training March 2023. That does not mean it has to be, you can have a June date, an October date, a November date, a September date, but no sooner than March 2023. So please consider that in your planning. And again, the contracts will end February 2025. So I hope that answers that question. And I'm gonna look in the chat, but again, if you wanna raise your hand to voice your question as well, that'll help us get through them. Okay, so first question was, what lead time can we expect with the award? How long so we'll be notified? Okay, I answered that. Someone put in a comment, Karina says, I highly encourage schools to work with their respective Workforce Support and Career Center when brainstorming which programs to offer. This will ensure the offerings are aligned with the employer needs, minimize duplication of programs during given program cycle, and provide labor market information. Absolutely agree. Thank you for that, Karina. Nancy asked, if we're using an approved Chapter 74 curriculum or a labor union approved curriculum, would that serve to demonstrate LMI and employer input? I think yes, if it's relevant to, and you demonstrate the need, the employer need, and that the training can meet that, absolutely. Because I know the blueprints still need to be updated. So if you have the localized knowledge in your region, absolutely. The other question is, when will we be able to utilize real-time LMI versus old regional? Go with real-time. You understand your needs. The regional blueprints are there as a guide, and we want to see that incorporated, but we know that there's some updates happening. Again, these are meeting what's in demand right now. And I think the more current you are with the employer needs, that showcases a strong application that we can make this with this training. Some other question. Okay, talked about the dates. Tris asked at Monty Tag, it's still unclear about underemployed. Is definition forthcoming? Yes. So as I mentioned, unemployed was a pain point. Underemployed, sorry, was a pain point because we used phrasing like, you know, self-sustaining wage, if they're making less than a self-sustaining wage. And it was difficult to define that because it varied from region to region. We can say we know what the minimum wage is because there's a number tag to it, but self-sustaining wage was very vague, and it was sort of crazy making to ask our grantees to sort of tell us how you want to do it. So we will announce it. I'm short of just outright saying it now because we literally have like a day before something little nuance can change. But the way that we will do it, there will be a reference sheet where you can just easily be able to account for who makes this income. Do you make it or not? There's going to be multiple ways to check. And we want to make it very straightforward and easy to verify and document so that you can sort of move on with your training person and get the person in. It's going to be as accommodating as possible. We understand previous ways. Again, we're a little crazy making. They weren't clear. We wanted to give local discretion, but it brought concern to how consistent that was. And so we want to give you that structure and really model this after how many federal grant procurement processes are, where they just sort of give you straightforward eligibility requirements and you know what to do. And we want to offer that structure for our grantees this time around. And this will have wide application, not just for CTI, but also WCTF and our other pipeline grants. Okay. So will there be an embargo? It really depends. And the embargo only depends on how the governor's office wants to announce. But if there is an embargo, that should not preclude us from being able to begin contracting. So generally, we sort of ask for, so long as the governor's office approves the awards that we recommend and want to postpone an announcement so that it can be packaged with another opportunity, like maybe a capital skills grant or something, or maybe with WCTF, they can still do that, but we can still begin contracting and make sure you all are set up to begin your training. So you know how it goes. It's gone that way before, but you can anticipate it, but we'll make sure that you can still move forward on your contracts, even if there is an embargo. All right, any remaining questions? Feel free to raise your hand. Going once, twice. Hearing none, I want to thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for joining us. Again, this is pre-application. There are many more opportunities for you to engage with this the information that we're offering. We hope this next round of CTI will attract a lot more schools to join in this effort to help bridge our labor and industry. The last thing I'll do is I want to put the link for all our other events, and I'm just trying to find it really fast. We've been sending this so often that I could barely keep track of where I sent things, but I want to put the Eventbrite link. Meg, if you're able to get it before me, can you put it in the chat? And it's just for our other events. And again, we have the bidders webinar coming soon next week. There you go. And I just want to share my screen so you're able to see all the events. Again, so procurement, this is what you're at today. Next, we have the bidders webinar, office hours, are the two opportunities, and then our in-school planning session for our new in-person planning session for our new school. So take a look at that link. And again, this session is being recorded and posted on our webpage. Thanks for joining us today. Have a great rest of day, and we'll hope to see you soon.
Thank you so much. It was great.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care now. Bye now.